Okay, you are now live. I'm just going to double check to make sure we are live on YouTube. You are now live.
Okay, so we should call the meeting to order, please. A few minutes after 9. Jeanette, you have a motion to
I do. So the first resolution is the adoption of the agenda, and that's moved by Councillor McDonald and seconded by Councillor Higgs, that the agenda for the February 23rd, 2022 meeting of the Procedural Bylaw Review Committee be adopted.
anyone opposed to the resolution? It's carried. Thank you.
And the next closure of
Declarations of conflict of interest? Any declarations by members of the committee? Seeing none, we will move on. Minutes of the February 16th meeting. Yeah.
So that is moved by Councillor Martin and seconded by Councillor McDonald, that the minutes of the Procedural Bylaw Review Committee meeting held February 16th, 2022 be adopted.
Anyone opposed to the resolution? It is carried. Thank you. Next, no deputations. We'll move on next to the reports. And Jeanette, I guess. Sorry, Jerry, go ahead.
Point. Yeah, this week, this is probably where I should interject. This week, our mayor had an article on Facebook saying that he'd like to change the length of term of office for the warden. He'd like to see it for the 4-year term. I'm not sure if this is where I should interject with this information or not, but he did say that if that would be his preference. I know we've already talked about the warden and the deputy warden and their roles, but I think this should be added as a point.
Certainly, it can come up for discussion.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know where exactly it fits in the procedural bylaw, Jeanette.
I don't know either. I don't know either. That's why
So under the procedural bylaw, under, sorry, I didn't bring it down with me. There is a section there for term of office, and as well as it was where we discussed who is eligible to run for warden and who isn't.
Okay.
So it would be back under that section. So the committee is more than welcome to discuss. I think once we get through these sections, my intent was to come back to the committee at a meeting to say, so we've gone through the whole bylaw, and then maybe here's some things that I've noticed other communities doing in their procedural bylaw. There's some things that were covered in the procedural bylaw workshop that I attended that are not in our bylaw, open for discussion. And then members as well can say, so what else have we missed? We can also look at term of office of warden as well to see if the committee wanted to look at that. I'm more than happy if the committee would like me to before that next meeting. I could poll the EOWC clerks group to see what other upper tiers are doing in terms of the term of office of their warden. If you'd like.
I'd be agreeable with that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think let's work through what we have today, and perhaps if we're in good time, maybe we can even start some of the discussion on warden term today, or wait till the next meeting to bring it up. But we'll certainly make sure that Jerry, that it gets an airing. Is that fair?
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Go ahead then, Jeanette. I think probably it's the next bit is probably up to you to share your screen and go through some of the points you wish to raise.
Yes, so Angelique, if you could put that document up on the screen, that would be great. So the next thing that we talked about was conduct during meetings, and at the last meeting I had recommended that section 16.2, which was duties under the members of duties of the members. We changed it sort of to conduct during meetings, and it talks about how the conduct should happen. So what I have here is as I noted, that most of the prohibitions that were listed under 16.2 were also included in the sections that were provided to me at the AMCTO workshop that I attended. But there were some additional ones. So I've noted those additional ones there that the committee may wish to discuss. It's totally up to you. But during that procedural bylaw workshop that I had attended, some of the other things that they had under conduct in meetings, they included a dress code. So it included a dress code during public meetings, which are your council meetings, and it just ensured that councillors and staff were in proper business attire. Again, it seems, a very small thing, but keep in mind that when we look at this procedural bylaw, it will flow over to the next council. So for most of us who are a little bit older and done this for quite a while, we know to show up in suit and tie or proper dress. But do you want that actually in the bylaw for when new councillors come on board? Maybe they're not sure how to dress for a council meeting. So when it's laid out in the bylaw, that they can know, well, here's what I'm expected to wear. It's very typical, I think, when we see it in a staff policy that, there's a thing in there that says you're expected to show up to work in business attire. And it just, again, helps people understand what they're expected to wear when they come to a council meeting, keeping in mind that this is for the next council where you could have a lot of new members. And then the other thing was they had a separate dress code for committee of the whole meetings. So committee of the whole meetings, for example, or committee meetings themselves, they're not as formal as council. So you may want to loosen it just a little bit and just choose a casual business attire as opposed to business attire. And then the third one was head dressing. And please keep in mind that this does not include religious head dressings. This is similar, like you don't want somebody coming showing up with a ball cap. Mom always said, remove the cap when you come to the kitchen table when you sit down to eat. So do you want that actually in there that, the hats come off when you attend council meetings? So these are just the dress codes that were included in, as I say, in that workshop that I had attended. And I just wanted to throw them in there for council's consideration of what everybody thinks.
Mr. Chair.
Bill?
Yeah. Should we have any consideration for dress code in the covering, say, a quickly call meeting by the warden, where you might be out in the field working at something, and the meeting is called of some urgency? Would there be exceptions in the procedural bylaw in regard to how you show up at that meeting?
As long as you have your axe in one hand, Bill, then I think it'd be fine. It'd be a
Well, the chair may not have his gavel. So
I don't think there's going to be any sanction. People, I think there certainly is some rationale for exceptions that can be explained by a member if they, for whatever reason, they had to walk to their vehicle, as an example, and couldn't wear dress shoes and a tie to get to their vehicle to get to the council meeting. I think there's room for leniency in that area. And I'd say I'm not sure how they would be sanctioned if a member showed up regularly in attire that was inappropriate or not in keeping with other members' attire. Then I think it would certainly be brought to that member's attention. Perhaps some sanction could be imposed at that time, but as a one-off situation, I don't see it as being particularly troublesome.
I can live with that.
So perhaps what we could do with the wording, because currently right now it's worded all members of council shall wear proper business attire. We could change that shall, which is mandatory, to something more discretionary, like all members of council are encouraged to wear proper business attire, or are expected.
Are expected to. That's better.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I mean, so many of the dress code norms have evolved, certainly more so in the last number of years. So what some people consider as business attire may not be what somebody else believes it to be. And I think as long as the clothing is respectful, I wouldn't be particularly unconcerned about it.
It's not at the top of my concerns either, Mr. Chair, in regard to dress code, so long as somebody doesn't come directly out of a say a farming environment with some collections. So
Well spoken.
And again, it's something that I try to encourage council to understand is that even though we're a small community, we're a rural community, a municipal council is a legitimate, recognized level of government, no different than the provincial government, no different than the federal government, certainly a different layer and a different level of responsibility, but it commands that same respect as what provincial government does and federal government. So, and it's just an encouragement and recognition that when people come to a council meeting, that they're respecting the body, not so much who they are, but respecting that this is a body of government.
I think you need to, excuse me, may I speak?
Certainly, Jerry.
I think you should, the matter of attire really is showing respect for your constituents. I really think you need to clean yourself up if you're going to, you do represent your constituents. And I know from local council meetings, I did see a councillor taken aside and told to clean himself up.
Okay.
You know, it goes back to what Bill said, you just don't come in out of the bush when you know you have a scheduled meeting ahead of you. You know, you're expected to show up accordingly.
Well, as an example, I mean, I've worn a shirt and tie, maybe wear my county vest. Is that appropriate business attire? Does it fit what we're expecting?
I think that's appropriate. That's in my opinion. The world has changed in the last few years. We have a different generation now we're dealing with too, not just different ethnic groups.
Yeah.
I have no trouble with the way the words in the procedural bylaws it stands today, because I think that all comes back to your own personal choice of how you want to appear in public, so in a business environment.
So just for that one thing then, so we're just going to change the shall to are expected. And did you want to add at the end, from what I'm also hearing from some of the members of the committee, we can add at the end, although exceptions may be made during extenuating circumstances?
That's fine.
Would that work for everybody?
Does for me.
Okay.
Fine with me.
And then the second one there for the dress code for committee of the whole, that's basically just recognizing that when you're not in full council, the rules are laxed and the dress code laxes a little bit as well. So you may, rather than, I don't know, business attire for one may be a suit and tie, but at committee of the whole, it's just a pair of dress pants and a nice shirt. It's not necessarily, it's what we call business casual.
Okay. Again, I think it's very difficult to define particularly. I mean, particularly most of the committee of the whole is embedded within our council meeting. So we show up at our dressed for our council meetings and move into committee of the whole. It's rare that we've had other meetings except perhaps for budget presentations or other, if we're hearing specific presentations and we're normally formed as council for that. Those things, the dress code seems to be more relaxed for those.
So that was what I was thinking when I included this as well, recognizing that council does go into committee of the whole during their council meetings, but we do typically have our budget meetings, for example, are through committee of the whole. I'm not sure if I can't think of any other ones, but we can, if council feels they need to have more discussion on something that may be an all-day discussion, we can do it through a committee of the whole meeting. So for example, one example may be once the committee finalizes and goes through all of the procedural bylaw and they're ready to present it to council, do we want to present it at a council meeting where it's only given 5 minutes? Or do we want to perhaps ask the warden that we call a committee of the whole meeting so that the committee can take council through some of the recommendations that they're proposing and all of council can, rather than council being expected to, very quickly look at it and make a decision. There may be a lot of discussion at the actual council meeting as well. So do we want to present this to a committee of the whole meeting before it actually goes to full council, where we can ask council to dedicate a few hours to going through this bylaw and what the committee has done with it? So there are opportunities to go into a committee, to have a committee of the whole meeting outside of council.
Yes.
And then again, the headdressing is just more so the hats. It clearly states that it's not unless they're religious purpose hats, headdressings. So it would not exempt somebody from wearing a religious headdressing. It just basically stops, hats or ball caps. I don't think I've ever seen anybody come in one, but again, this was something that was included in the procedural bylaw that was provided to us as an example of things to include and how to word things. So again, it's the committee's call of what they think about this.
It can be in the bylaw, but I don't really see it as being particularly a likely occurrence. And if it happened, I think the member would be, it would be mentioned to the member pretty quickly that it was outside of the normal dress attire, and if need be, we could change the bylaw at that point. But I think it's highly unlikely that's going to occur.
I agree with Alan.
I have no problem with the way it's setting.
So I'm hearing the consensus, should we remove headdressing or and just deal with it if it ever comes up? I myself, when I first read, so I'm going to be honest, when I first read this, I understand that they don't want the hats in it, that they shouldn't be there. But headdressing has become a term that we typically use for those who use headdressings for religious purposes. And I'm just thinking the word headdressing itself makes me a little bit uncomfortable.
Well, if you look at our federal parliament, you can see headdressing. It's like,
Yeah.
it's an accepted thing. But nobody's wearing baseball caps, so you're right.
No, but to have the word headdressing is just.
I think it could be removed safely, but I don't care strongly about it. I just think it's so unlikely to happen. And if it did, it would be a one-time only before the member was encouraged to take the ball cap off and don't show up with it again.
So did you want to leave it in?
Majority vote of the members, I don't care strongly one way or the other. I don't think it needs to be there, but I don't care if it is in.
The only point, Mr. Chair, I would suggest is having it there does give you the tools if the occasion arises. Whereas removing it, then it gives license to anyone who feels like they don't want people to see their bald spot to wearing a cap during a meeting. So having it there does give you, the chair, a tool to use. But I'm not strong one way or the other either, but I would suggest keeping it just for that purpose.
Okay.
Good point.
Jerry, or?
No, that's a good point. I think Bill's right, absolutely right.
Just leave it in then? Oh, sorry.
I don't think that it hurts to leave it in there.
Okay, that's the consent of the committee then. We'll leave it in. Let's move on. Thank you.
So, sorry, I'm just going back to the headdressing. It does include members of the general public as well. So any member of the public that comes into your council meeting would be expected to remove the hats.
That's
Well,
correct.
maybe it's worth worthwhile keeping for that purpose alone.
So the next piece was, again, for council's consideration, and it would be, what they've called it is a section on code of ethics and confidentiality. And this specifically deals around closed meetings. So if members contravene closed meeting requirements, the currently the bylaw provides for the following terms of a closed meeting. So our bylaw simply states that no member shall, where a matter has been discussed in a closed meeting and where the matter remains confidential, disclose the content of the matter or the substance of deliberations of the closed meeting. So that's what our bylaw currently states. So again, the procedural bylaw workshop that I had attended had some pretty strong and, stringent criteria around closed meetings. So there, it says, the first point was upon completion of any in-camera council meeting, the decision of council with respect to any of the enumerated items listed in the section, including direction to municipal administration, shall be reported publicly by council to the extent of the public interest permits. So what that basically is at the end of a closed meeting, we come and we report out. So the warden may report out if you're in a closed meeting and you're discussing labor relations or employee negotiations, because we're in negotiations with the union. The warden can report out that, we gave direction to staff to continue negotiating. It's not necessarily a resolution.
Rise and report.
Yeah, so this is what is the rise and report aspect of it, but it basically says what is going to be reported out. And then in terms of the next one, in-camera inquiries, the response of council members to inquiries about any matter dealt with during an in-camera closed meeting prior to it being reported publicly shall be, this matter is still under advisement, no comment. So that's basically if a member of the public or a member of the press come to you because they knew there was a closed meeting last week and they asked you what happened or can you give me any update? That would be the typical council response, is that the matter is still under advisement and I have no comment. So it's basically telling councillors how to comment when somebody asks them a question about a closed meeting.
Jeanette, one thing that is always, I have felt with respect to closed meetings, it is my understanding that eventually, if there is a reporting out of the closed meeting or a subsequent bylaw that may occur at a later meeting that really contains the information related to the closed session, that's fine. But I don't think that, from my personal perspective, I don't think it rests in my hands to say, well, Councillor McDonald didn't support this motion when we talked about it, or Councillor Martin was all over the place. He liked it. He really liked it and was ready to go on it. To me, those kinds of discussions remain closed in my view, although the matter of the decision can be released. It's a public decision, but the background, in my view, should remain closed. And I don't know whether that's relevant in this bylaw or whether that's true, in fact. But.
So typically that would fall under the record of the closed meeting. So if we're in a closed meeting, I take the minutes there. And those minutes do still remain confidential, even if there's, so the resolution is never actually passed and closed. So the discussion in a closed meeting is still closed. The resolution that comes out of a closed meeting is not actually passed in closed meeting. That's a resolution that's passed in open session. So it's only the resolution that is in open session. The discussion and all of that is still a record of the closed meeting, and it should remain closed.
So may I ask a question? So in other words, if we have a recorded vote, that recorded vote is always an open session?
Yes.
Okay.
So under the Municipal Act, you're not actually able to vote for past resolutions in closed session. unless they are direction to staff.
He wants to call Andrew,
Oh,
wants to know
that's-
if you say yes or
Yeah,
no.
that's fine. if he
Okay.
does.
No, he really wants to.
I'm sorry, Jeanette, I was interrupted.
No worries at all. So I was just saying, I totally forget what I just said.
We're talking about a recorded vote.
Oh, recorded vote. Yeah, so I was just saying that you cannot actually, under the municipal act, you're not able to pass resolutions in closed session. You're only allowed to, or you're not allowed to vote in closed session unless it's direction to staff.
Yeah, I understand that. It's strictly, the issue to me is that everything that was in closed session, other than perhaps the actual decision that may come out after closed session, should remain closed. That people say, well, now it's public information. We can now talk about it. It's no longer a closed matter. Well, the decision is, but the background material is not. And how members voted and how the discussion came about, I think remains closed, in my view.
And that's correct. So the discussion and the subject matter is in closed session. That's where you get your information. You don't vote in closed session. You get your information in closed session and you make a decision, and you individually hear the relevant information and base your decision on that. And then when we come out in open session, we're going to put a resolution on the floor. And based on what you've learned in closed session, you vote on that resolution. So the actual record of the closed meeting remains confidential. So it's, and that confidential information is covered under the other section of the bylaw where you cannot disclose what's happened in closed session.
All right, thank you. I don't want to belabor the point.
No worries at all. So this first one basically is to ensure that when there is a matter in closed session and it hasn't been dealt with publicly, that if you're approached by a member of the public or a member of your constituency or the press, and they're asking questions about the information, your comment should be, this matter is still under advisement, no comment. Or basically to that effect.
Fair enough, thank you.
And then the other one, so then they get into some violations here. So the other one, the next under that states, any violation of process to this regulation will result in exclusion of the offending council members, requiring a 2/3 vote from future closed meetings of council, and that members shall no longer be provided with correspondence, materials, or information proposed to be dealt with by members of council at a closed meeting. That's pretty. So again, these are not my words. This is just something that I'm bringing to you that was included in the workshop that I had attended.
But through you, Mr. Chair, Jeanette, does this mean, and I looked at this, does this mean that that member will not be able to attend any in-camera sessions for the rest of the term? Or just while the issue that was being discussed where he was in conflict?
So as it states there, it requires a 2/3 vote. So it's going to come with some form of a motion. So the motion could indicate that the member is excluded from closed meetings for the next 3 months. They could say that the member is excluded from closed meetings regarding this subject. That would depend on the resolution, because as it states there, it does take a 2/3 vote to exclude that member.
So what you're saying is that after the member was excluded from discussions in regard to the issue that he had conflict with, or he say leaked to the public, a vote could be taken at the next meeting or the next meeting with that kind of regulation saying that we're going to exclude this member in the way of a penalty for 2 terms of closed sessions or something along that line. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so this puts a tool into council's hands. So right now, currently, if that were to happen, there are no tools in the procedural bylaw to sort of deal with that, councillor, other than a complaint can be made to the integrity commissioner. But other than that, there are no tools in the so what this basically is giving the warden and council some tools to put into the bylaw if a member of council ever violates our closed session right now. So as I mentioned earlier, the only wording that we have right now is that no member shall, where a matter has been discussed in closed meeting and where the matter remains confidential, disclose the content of the matter or the substance of the deliberations. So it's saying that you can't do this, but there are no tools in the bylaw to discipline that counselor if they do it. This is a tool into the hands of the warden and council so that if, for example, Councillor Higgs took some information from the closed meeting and went public with it, it's giving council a tool now to say, to put a motion on the floor to say, Councillor Higgs is now excluded from closed meetings for the remainder of the year, if that's what you want to go with. It does require a 2/3 vote, but it gives you the tools to discipline a councillor who has violated those regulations.
I think that's appropriate.
It sounds logical.
And then the next one was exclusion at closed meetings. So again, this falls into the, this falls into, again, the violation part. So it says here, the determination of whether or not a violation of process to the closed meeting provisions of this bylaw and the length of the exclusion from council meetings, if so determined, shall be made by council at a closed meeting, and the issue shall be considered by council prior to the affected member being excluded from any closed meeting by the 2/3 vote. The result of council's deliberations shall be reported out publicly. So this goes the next step. So if the violation occurs at the next closed meeting, the member is still able to attend that closed meeting. And that is where the motion's put on the floor. It allows the council perhaps an opportunity to explain himself, to defend himself. But at the next closed meeting, it clearly states that the member will be present there. It's, I guess, kind of like put on trial. They're able to defend themselves. Council's able to have a discussion of why you did this, why you did what you did. And then at that point, you can make the determination of whether to exclude from how many meetings. But if you do exclude the member, it does have to be reported out publicly.
Now, how is that vote taken, through you, Mr. Chair? How is that vote by the other members taken with the member that's being excluded present?
I don't know whether Jeanette has any.
Well, that thought never occurred to me, but the only thing that stops a member from voting is if they have a pecuniary interest. There's no provision for not voting if you have a conflict of interest, I don't believe. It's pecuniary interest right now. The member is able to defend themselves. And you know that could be something that we want to put in here. Oh, sorry, if you go to item D, it does say here, member not permitted to vote. D? Yes.
I think
So-
what Councillor McDonald, I think, is raising the issue in if members are publicly voting to censure me, I'm going to get even with you guys. You know, mind you, in our council, it's going to be 6 of the 7 members probably that are going to be, or 5 of the 7 members are going to be required to vote to exclude me or to censure me. It'll be pretty clear that if 2/3 vote against my involvement for a closed meeting, that I'm not going to have a lot of friends on council at that time.
I think The question is there room to have a ballot in regard to this issue rather than a show of hands while the individual that's being tested is in the room?
Sorry, say that again?
Well, you're taking a vote to make a decision in regard to one of your fellow members being excluded from the meeting or future meetings or some term. And that member is sitting in the room with you while you're taking the vote. So my question is as Al related to there, are we setting up ourselves to be some kind of return favor in the future that you didn't vote to support me here, or you voted for me or whatever? And I'm wondering if there's some way to disguise that vote so it's just not a show of hands.
Secret ballot.
The municipal act doesn't allow secret ballots unless it's for the election of the warden.
So,
But keep in mind, we're not,
so is it possible to ask then the member that you're voting for to leave the room while the vote's being taken?
I guess that would be a council's call. I mean, if you look at it on the flip side, does that member have a right to know? I mean, even in open session, if, for example, the councillor has come up against the integrity commissioner and council has to vote on whether or not to sanction that member, it's the same situation. I mean, keep in mind that this is not something that you would do lightly, right? We're talking about here that a member of council has gone and released confidential information to the public. And that's quite serious.
Absolutely, absolutely. Puts the whole county and all the members in some situations, it puts them all in jeopardy in some way, shape, or form. So it's a pretty important rule to adhere to. So, and I dare say maybe I'm looking at ghosts here, a boogeyman, but maybe the way it's written will suffice. But I just threw it out there for discussion purposes.
But it seems that there isn't much opportunity to do that. I mean, council, I suppose, could ask the member to excuse themselves, but ultimately, I think if it gets to the point where a 2/3 vote of censure, then the member would pretty much know where their votes lay in any event. So.
And again, you're voting here on whether or not to exclude that member from closed council meetings in the future. And again, it's based on the resolution that council opts to put forward. Is it an exclusion of all council meetings? Was the member simply passionate about this one subject that it's exclusion of any future meetings dealing with this matter?
I think, as you point out, Jeanette, that could be done by the resolution the council proposes.
Yeah.
Fortunately, it's not something that is a common occurrence in any event, and so I would anticipate that it's not something we would have to deal with as a council, perhaps more than once in a term at the very most, if ever.
Well, I keep thinking about what happened in Carlton Place last term of office. You know, but that member was allowed to participate after the issue had been resolved.
And again, that's
At the resolution council.
yeah, it's at the call of council. It simply, as before, it simply puts a tool into council's hands to deal with when a member violates the confidentiality of closed meetings. Because currently there's nothing in the bylaw. So even though it says you shall not do this, if you do it, there's no consequence for it. So this is putting a tool into council's hand to deal with the matter when it comes up.
Why couldn't you, in the D section there, put a little extra sentence saying that he may be asked to leave the council chambers during that vote? He may be asked.
That work for, so that would go under D. So it says the member affected shall not be permitted to vote on a motion respecting his purported violation of the closed meeting provision of the procedural bylaw, his exclusion from closed meetings, or the length of any such exclusion. And we can put at the end of that, and may be asked to leave the room.
May be asked to leave. May be asked to leave. At the discretion of the council.
That's a good approach.
I guess, Jeanette, is that going to turn out to be a legal request? Do we have the power to do that?
Sorry, is that going to? Sorry.
Is that going to be a legal request? Does the council have the authority to exclude a member under those circumstances?
Would just, while you're thinking about Jeanette, how would this be in under the conflict rules? If you dare to conflict, you actually get up and leave the council chambers while discussions are taking place there.
That's correct, but that's pecuniary interest. That's the only thing that where we have that you have to leave the room is pecuniary interest.
Yeah, okay, but it couldn't apply here either, right?
I can check with my colleagues about our actual legal authority to ask somebody to leave the room.
Okay. Because I don't want Al Reville watching me vote against him in that meeting, so, because he'll come back and he's a big guy. So.
Again, you're not voting against him, you're simply voting to say you did something wrong.
Yeah, well, you're supporting the resolution. I understand that. I understand you're not voting one way or the other. You're just voting to either agree with the motion or disagree, that's all.
And then the next one, E, release of information. This just verifies that it's just the warden that can release information to the public about closed meetings at the direction of council. And then member expressing personal positions. So there it talks a little bit about, it says, unless council by vote determines otherwise upon the public disclosure of any report discussed at an in-camera meeting, any individual member may express their own personal position on the item, but shall not refer to or discuss the specific positions or opinions, written or verbal, of other members or of administration. So that really covers what you had asked about earlier, Councillor McDonald, about if we report something out in open session, is what I said in closed session, does that all of a sudden get reported out? So this is saying no. You can express your own personal opinion. So for example, you may say, I didn't agree with it, but that's the end of it. You can't say, you know, Alan didn't agree with it or Jerry didn't agree with it.
Excuse me, so I as a councillor can say after a closed session, I don't agree with that subdivision being formed?
You can express your own personal opinion. So this is allowing you, an individual member may express their own personal position on an item, but shall not refer to or discuss the specific position or opinions of others.
Having probably spent more years around the council table than most of my esteemed fellow members here, my suggestion is not to speak about anything on the issue. Let those spokesperson who is delegated vis-a-vis the warden or their appointee do the discussion. Because I found that when you start expressing your opinion, it may be different than what the outcome of the vote was, but it leads to a division in the various councils. So the best thing to do is I've always used the caution of just staying mum on the issue and let the vote come out and go from there. That's just my opinion.
So I think this is after the vote. So for example, I'm trying to think of
Well, if the subdivision gets approved somewhere, and I didn't agree with it happening.
Yeah, so for example, if council in closed session agreed with, we're at the final ages extent of a land transaction.
Mhm.
And land transactions are done in closed session, obviously to protect your negotiating power. And we eventually report out that we're authorized to enter into an agreement of purchase and sale with so-and-so for this amount. So that's reported out now. It's now out in the public that the county is going to purchase a block of land at this amount for whatever. This is what that's talking about now. So, and in closed session, perhaps there was a discussion of that's way too much. That developer is, I don't know, charging way too much. I don't know what the discussion might be. But one councillor may feel that, no, we shouldn't be buying this land. We should be leasing it. We should be doing this. We should be doing that. So when it's reported out in public and then all of a sudden, 2 weeks later, a constituent comes and says, I think you paid too much for that land. Are you going to say, well, it's the will of council? Or are you going to say, well, I agree, we paid too much, but that's just my opinion.
I agree with Councillor McDonald. I think those matters should be left in closed session. I mean, how many people are going to play it against the other? And I wouldn't have supported that kind of motion in council when clearly I did, because I just think it's something that should not ever be discussed. You might discover, if you polled all of the members individually, what they tell you out of closed session could be different than the vote that was taken in closed session. There's no way of determining that.
Okay, so we can remove that. Is that everything's okay?
Yep. I want to have my cake and eat it too.
And then the next one is no public release of documents. So agendas or any items for consideration at a council meeting closed to the public shall not be released to the public. Sorry, it's been cut off a little bit there. So that's just confirmation that any documentation that's in closed session stays in closed session. It's not to be released.
Right.
Yes.
I agree with that.
And then the last one is obligation for confidentiality. So it's the obligation of each member of council to keep information confidential. And this obligation continues even after the member ceases to be an elected member of council.
Just in that, is there a time limit under the Municipal Act? Is there a time limit on which this information should remain confidential?
Well, under the Municipal Act, it only allows you to go into closed session and to close a meeting from the public. It doesn't talk about confidential information. And it does allow you as well, it gives you specific criteria on when you can go into closed session. But it's not, for the majority of them, it's not mandatory, it's discretionary. So for example, property transactions, you do have the authority under the Municipal Act to go into a closed session for land acquisition or disposition, but it's discretionary. You don't have to. We all do it simply because you want to protect your negotiating power. It doesn't actually talk about the material. That's where the procedural bylaw kicks in. So it's the confidential information that's in there. That's where the procedural bylaw kicks in, that we want to keep that information to remain confidential.
Okay, thank you.
And then disclosures of pecuniary interest was the next section, and I had no comments. I think that's pretty much covered for how it is. I don't know if members have any other thoughts. And then the next section after that is the
Jeanette?
definitions. Yes?
Jeanette, I always have a question with 17.3, where the interest of a member has not been disclosed by reason of the member's absence from a particular meeting. The member shall disclose the interest and otherwise comply at the first meeting of council or committee, as the case may be attended by the member after the particular meeting. Something comes up maybe that I would have declared an interest in if I was away from council and didn't really appreciate that need, or if had I attended, I would have declared a conflict. It was a matter that came up at council. I didn't declare it, was unaware of it, and failed to do so at a subsequent meeting because I was unaware of it. Where does that leave me?
Sorry,
I've lost you.
I'm understanding the question. So something came up at a council meeting where you were not in attendance,
Yes,
but if you had been in attendance, you would have declared a conflict?
yes,
Was it
but it may
on
have
the
been,
agenda or verbally brought up?
yes, it was just verbally brought up or something, and how can I be sanctioned if I didn't know it occurred? And if I didn't attend the meeting, I mean, if I was at the meeting and declared the conflict, I would leave the meeting. I wasn't there at the meeting in the first place. I don't understand why I have to declare it at the subsequent meeting.
So that's under the conflict of the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. So it does.
I understand. It's
declare
quite odd.
as well, but I mean, if something comes up at your council meeting where you're not in attendance and it comes up verbally, it's added to the agenda. If there's obviously going to be a record of it in the minutes, correct? And you would read the minutes and you would see, oh, that was discussed. I should just let Angela know that, you know, hey, I see that this was discussed at the last meeting. I just want to know that I have a conflict of interest due to this.
Okay, all right. It always seems.
Along the same line, Mr. Chair, Jeanette, when we have a closed session, we have the agenda comes out, and one of the questions on there is a disclosure of pecuniary interest. But as a council member, a lot of times we don't have the information as to what we're going to discuss in a closed session. And so what do we do in a situation where all of a sudden there's an item being discussed that you might have a pecuniary interest in? Do you have to declare rate that at that point?
So the only things that are discussed in closed session are what's on the agenda. Like when the agenda goes out, the information and the material is on that agenda. I'm not sure how you would.
Well, in our council meetings sometimes, especially when we're going viral, we'll be going into a closed session, and of course, the mayor will ask if there's any conflict. Well, we're not aware of what we're going to discuss.
Do you not get a closed agenda with the items on it?
No, but it just has the general rules of conduct, what you're actually doing. It might be solicitor information, or it might be purchase of land or something like that. But it's very in general, but until we get into the discussions, we really don't know what we're going to talk about.
So
I often say, well, I don't know whether I have a conflict. I don't know what we're going to talk about.
So
We always have the subject matter in front of
it
us.
has to have the subject matter. So when you go into closed session, you have to pass a resolution in open session that states that you're going into closed session, for example, employee relations or negotiations, but you have to have on there the general nature of what that discussion is going to be. So it has to have on your agenda as it relates to negotiations with OPSU.
I agree with you, but I said there's been situations where things have come up at the last moment and you don't know whether you're in conflict. So I assume the only way you can do is leave the issue, you declare a conflict.
I'm still lost though. How do things come up at the last moment? You can't add to a closed agenda.
Well, it's okay. I'll have a discussion on that locally. That's on our procedural bylaw.
I hear what Councilman McDonald is saying, and I think the appropriate thing, regardless of the circumstance, if there's something involves at a council meeting or in closed session or otherwise, where you feel you suddenly realize you have a conflict, you declare at that time and leave. And I don't think you can be penalized for that. My take.
No, if something starts being discussed and you do feel that you have a conflict, for sure you would leave. I guess what threw me off is that when you say you don't know what's on the agenda.
All right, I'm ready to move on. It was just a question I had in my mind.
So the next one, of course, is the deputations. So the current bylaw for deputations, just some things that I was looking at. So for example, 18.7, it has a maximum of 2 deputations to address council per meeting. And that's agreeable for sure, but currently at our September meeting, when we invite members of the public to a public meeting, well, they're actually during the public meeting, but at the following meeting in October, we typically have all of our external boards and committees come to present their budget. They are technically a deputation, so they go over 5. Same thing with council orientation sometimes. Yearly, they come and we ask them to come and make a presentation on the overview of their services. So I just wanted to suggest to the committee that we put in there excluding the county's external boards and funded agencies.
Jeanette, what about times where we have public coming to present for budget purposes? We may allow more than 2 deputations, would we not?
Well, so that's a little bit different because that's a public meeting. That's a public meeting at the beginning of the meeting. So it's a public meeting is a little bit different than deputation. So when you have a public meeting, you open the meeting up to the public to come and speak, similar to a public meeting under the Planning Act.
Okay.
You don't put limitations on them at that point. But
Sure.
we're talking about during the council meeting when you have the deputations coming. So
All right,
right
thank
now,
you.
as I noted in October, we have all of our external agencies and our 2 funded transportation agencies that now have to come to council and provide an overview of their budget for the following year before council goes into budget deliberations. And that's
Fair enough.
the 2. But now outside of that, is council still supportive of limiting it or capping it at 2 deputations?
I have no problem the way it's written with the addition.
Yeah, the addition's okay.
And then the next section is rules of debate. So I really had no proposed changes. I've looked at this. It pretty much covers what was in the procedural bylaw, that workshop that I had attended.
Jeanette, I'd like to quickly go back to section 18.3.
For sure.
The clerk in consultation of the warden shall have the authority to deem a deputation inappropriate or outside the scope of council authority and deny the item a place on the agenda. I wonder what grounds we might do that. I mean, I'm comfortable with the concept of avoiding having a deputation that's maybe frivolous or has an axe to grind without any particular relevance to a strong subject matter other than their own very personal opinion about a particular item, that they've got an axe to grind to somebody. But otherwise, what guidelines do you offer in terms of determining whether a deputation is appropriate or not?
So we've actually used this a few times. There was one time when there was a planning matter that was being discussed. Well, it wasn't being discussed, it had already been discussed. But for example, for plans of subdivision, when it comes to site plan control and the conditions of the subdivision, that's a township jurisdiction, not a county jurisdiction. So deputations wanted to come and express to council their unhappiness at something that had taken place on certain lands in one of the townships. And of course, we had explained to them that's a township jurisdiction. It's not under the jurisdiction of the county. So we denied the deputation. There was another instance where deputations wanted to come and speak to council again about their opposition to a plan of subdivision that had already been approved. And again, they were denied that because they weren't bringing forward any new information. They just wanted to rehash what had already been spoken about in the past.
That's fine. I just wondered what.
Like that, and we do speak with the warden, and we explain to the warden why we feel, you know, this is outside of our jurisdiction, or, you know, the procedural bylaw states that you can only come and speak once unless you have new information. What they provided is not new information. So we're looking to deny that deputation. So those would be examples of, we would never deny a deputation just to deny it. There's obviously a reason there, but that it has been used a few times in the past.
All right, thank you. Moving on to 19.
So as I said, I didn't really have any comments for section 19. It pretty much included everything that was in the proposed, or sorry, the bylaw that I had received during the workshop.
I had a question on 19.6.
Oh, okay, for sure.
Just, I wasn't entirely clear on the way the sentence was written. No member shall speak more than twice to the same question without council's permission, except that a reply shall be permitted only from a member who has presented the main motion. I'm not clear on what that means.
So, and again, when council moves into committee of the whole, it sort of relaxes these rules. So that's why we move into committee of the whole, so that you're not curtailed after 5 minutes. If you speak more than, you're permitted to speak a little more than once. That's what committee of the whole does. It relaxes those rules. But let's say, for example, you're not in committee of the whole and Councillor Martin has put a motion on the floor under motions. And he's put it on the floor, and here members are only allowed to speak twice. So Councillor Martin obviously is going to be able to speak more than twice because he's responding to questions. So if, for example, it says no member shall speak more than twice to the same question, except that to reply is permitted only from the member who has presented the motion. So, for example, Jerry puts a motion on the floor and 5 different councillors ask him a question. He's obviously speaking 5 different times. So he is able to respond and to speak, or if they criticize the motion or say something against the motion, he's able to defend his philosophy, so to speak.
I understand your discussion. I'm not sure how well that's actually written in the language of the clause. Or do others feel very comfortable with it? And maybe it's just my interpretation of it.
I didn't have any issues while I was reading it, so
Okay.
nothing jumped up in my mind.
Okay.
So I don't have it directly in front of me, but I can certainly bring it back to the committee at the next meeting. But that section was actually amended back in 2015. So when you look at the bylaw under brackets, it says amended by bylaw 2015-044 that was passed October 2015. So what I can do is I can relook at that bylaw or the report that presented that bylaw to see what the philosophy was behind that.
Maybe it could say something without council's permission, colon or semicolon. The member who presented the main motion may respond to questions. Was clarified in my mind.
So rather than accept that a reply shall be permitted from a member who has presented the main motion, we can put accept that question, except the presenter of the main motion may respond to questions.
Yes,
I could live with that addition.
I think it just clarifies the issue as far as I'm concerned. I mean, maybe I'm the one who's out of line here, but I don't think it helps clarify it a bit.
It would probably help the chair or people who wanted to shut down discussion on that issue. It would probably give a license to the chair of the meeting to allow it to go on a little more just to get a fuller understanding.
Okay.
In 1911,
Yep.
The warden's ruling is final unless it is challenged. Does the warden relinquish the chair at that point for that council vote?
That's a good point. So if we challenge the chair, if you challenge the chair. So perhaps. So did you want to, under 19.10, it says any member may challenge the ruling of the warden immediately following the ruling. And we could put in which the deputy warden shall take the chair.
I'm open to other comments from other members on this. Just something I asked, and it seemed to me there might be a merit to have the warden relinquish the chair.
Or maybe it does go under 1911.
I don't care 1911 or 1910. It just
Final unless challenged, and if challenged, the deputy warden will take the chair.
how do other members feel about that?
What does 1912, the council's decision is final if the warden is challenged? So what decision is council going to take?
Well, if you, so for example, let's say the warden makes a ruling on, let's say Councillor Martin raises a point of order. And the warden says, no, that's not a point of order. Councillor Martin can say, well, I challenge the chair on that. So then all of council will vote, does Councillor Martin have a point of order? And if they all vote in favor, yes, then that decision overrides the ruling of the chair, which said it's not a point of order. That's the quickest one I could come up with. But does that, it could also be, you know, on a different note, the warden may be trying to calm down. Maybe there's a member who's speaking too many times and the warden tells him, you know, you've had your speaking, you've spoken your 2 times. That's it. You're no longer able to speak anymore. And the member keeps speaking and the warden goes to discipline him. Another member may say, I challenge the chair on that. So the warden throughout the meeting can make a number of different, and when we say warden, It could be deputy warden as well, right? Because during council meetings, when you go into committee of the whole, it's the deputy warden that's in the chair. So maybe we need to read it. The bylaw really isn't written for deputy warden going into the chair during council meetings, because it does continually say the warden can do this, whereas most of your business is actually taking place in committee of the whole.
Well, I noted that on 19.1, to address council, a member shall request to speak should be recognized by the warden and direct all comments to the warden, but that's council, not committee of the whole, so.
And we could put the chair, we could leave it as the chair. I'm just not, yeah, it's not really written to reflect that at a council meeting, it's really the deputy warden in the chair for the majority of it, not the warden.
Well, it could be address council, the member shall request to speak be recognized by the warden / deputy warden and direct all comments through the chair.
Been on 12 years, I've never seen this happen.
That the deputy warden takes over. So that was added maybe 8 years ago at the last council, just to give more opportunity to get experience. Certainly
Okay.
pull that report back up for the committee if we
It's
want to
just,
look at
I've
this.
never seen this in real life happen. It's new.
I haven't either. It was, so I'm just wondering if maybe at so when we go back up to duties of the deputy warden, I can bring for the committee. How about I forward the committee and we can have this discussion, because it seems like a bigger discussion at the next meeting. I can provide for you the report that made these changes to the bylaw. I think it was the same report that brought in council liaisons, and it was the same report that had the deputy warden take over the chair during committee of the whole. And you know, does that still fly? Does that work? Is it working? Do you think that well, I have not seen it myself either.
We're referring to a challenge of the chair.
No, we're referring to right now, Councillor Martin is talking about he's not seen this happen anywhere else where the deputy warden takes over the council meeting when you move into committee of the whole. Because currently right now for your council meetings, it's the deputy warden that's running most of the meeting, not the warden.
Yes, understood. Okay.
I'd like to hear a little more discussion around this particular issue at the next meeting, if Jeanette can find some further information. Because I think different wording actually could be added to this to make it clear.
Okay. But in terms of the section 19, Councillor Rebel, was there any, was I able to answer your questions?
On whether the warden relinquishes the chair or the 19.1.
Well, I think we're going to add that if the ruling of the warden is challenged, that they relinquish the chair.
Okay.
But 19.1.
I just thought, since technically the deputy warden chairs the committee of the whole, is that still considered council?
So committee of the whole is not considered council. So when you have a council meeting, you do the first few pieces in council and then you move into committee of the whole. Now, a number of
Okay.
meetings municipalities do that because it allows for more open discussion and a more relaxing of the rules. So a lot of them do move into committee of the whole. When I worked for the city of Brockville, for example, they move into committee of the whole. It allows for more wholesome discussion, but it doesn't put the deputy mayor in the chair.
So
Chair. But then when
so
you
section,
come out of the whole, so that's why we always move that motion when you come out of committee of the whole, that council receive the report of the committee of the whole and the appropriate bylaws and actions be adopted. Because committee of the whole, even though you're all of council, it's a committee, it's not council. So that's why we touch that resolution.
so the wording in 19.1 is correct. No change is needed.
Yeah, great.
It may be needed if, for example, so it says to address council, a member shall request to speak, be recognized by the warden and direct all comments through the warden. If you're in committee of the whole, you're not going through the warden. So when you start looking at the recommend reports from the chief administrative officer, at that point, you're in committee of the whole and the deputy warden is in the chair. So if you want to speak, you would go through the deputy warden, not the warden.
Yes, but clause 19.1 is correct in the wording that is placed, because the warden is head of council. And only in the case where the deputy warden was asked to take over in the absence of the warden during a council meeting would the comments go there. But I think that's covered elsewhere in the bylaw. The deputy warden assumes the duties of the warden in the warden's absence or inability to act, or for some other relinquishment of the chair. So I don't think that clause needs to be modified.
Okay, now I see what you're saying now.
Carry on then, Jeanette.
So just under motions, I really had no comments under motions except for there's one, and only because my role as clerk is to ensure accountability and transparency and the public knows what's happening. So 20.11 motions considered to be read. So currently it says that motions contained in the public agenda, we don't read them. So it currently says motions contained in the published agenda will only be read if requested by a member of council or under the following conditions. A member requests a recorded vote, or an amendment to the main motion is made, both the amendment and the main motion to amend are read.
We're in COVID terms.
Or that. So, and I have put some notes there, you know, because things to consider when we're not, so when we get back into the normal world and we're all sitting around the table, typically the motions are not read, if you'll recall. So it's just the warden will say, okay, next item, and I would simply say moved by, seconded by, carried. Because we used to put the agenda up on the screen. Well, the agenda, we can't do that during virtual meetings or the way we're doing it now because the agenda doesn't go up on the screen. But when we come out of that and we go back to regular meetings and the agenda's up on the screen, do you still support that motions not be read? And I bring this forward because in terms of transparency, you know, do you feel you're being transparent by not reading those motions? You know, somebody with a visual disability, they're sitting in your council meeting, they're not going to see that screen. You know, there's been one time, and I recall a mistake through the clerk's office, we accidentally put the wrong resolution on the council agenda that went with the report. Now, if we hadn't have been reading motions at the time, that would have never been picked up and council would have passed the motion. So I know that the issue behind that being changed to not reading motions was because that some felt they were very long and it takes a long time to read them. And I fully respect that it can, you know, lengthen your council meeting by maybe 5 minutes by reading those motions. But I just want to make sure the committee feels that, are you being open and transparent by simply running a council meeting where it says moved by, seconded by, carried, and you have no idea what you're. I'm just throwing that out there.
Well, in my opinion, it's the councilor's responsibility to have read that fully, but you just don't sit back and allow it to be passed without. That's where we have a responsibility to read those.
Yes, and I'm thinking
But you're
more
talking
for
about the
public
public now, the
transparency.
public, yeah, transparency.
You know, especially now when we're live streaming meetings. I mean, even when we go back to in-person, fully in-person meetings where the public is able to now come back into the auditorium and attend. The plan forward is to continue those live streams because the past 2 years have shown that there's a lot of people interested in the council meetings and a lot of people watching. So when they're being live streamed.
I can live with the verbiage that's put before us.
So the wording that's before you is what's in the bylaw now. So are you happy to keep it in there or should we remove it?
I'm happy to keep it as written, and unless you feel or believe there's enough people who feel disadvantaged by not reading the resolutions. At the moment, I think for me personally, it's acceptable, but I'll hear other members.
I can live with it because it speeds up the council meetings quite considerably. And all you're doing is repeating what we've already read by ourselves.
I agree with Bill and Alan. We don't need to.
Agree with them too, because I've already read it and
I think Jeanette's point was if there's a member of the public, though, who has a visual impairment and can't read the motions, they are not able to, there's not a lack of transparency to those individuals. I think that's Jeanette's point, and that's well taken, but I'm not sure how often that applies.
Well, and I'm also looking at, as I mentioned as well, moving forward when we start again to live stream the meetings. So the majority of people do not come to the council, come to the meeting, but they are watching it on video. So for example, if we're all back in the auditorium and yes, the motions are up on the screen, but now the meeting is being videotaped and it's going out to the public. So if you're a member of the public and you're referring back to a council agenda, all you're going to hear is moved by, seconded by, carried. You're not going to have any idea what they're moving and seconding because unless you have an agenda in front of you. So I guess the point more is not so much that even though when we get back into council meetings and you're sitting in the auditorium, we're still going, the plan is still to live stream those meetings out. Simply because history has shown us that there is an interest in council meetings. You know, the public is interested. It's more accessible for them to be able to watch a council meeting when they get home from work because they work during the day, or it's more accessible for them to watch a council meeting because they can't travel 2 hours to get to the county building. So I think I noted to council during my last business plan presentation that roughly 75 people are watching your council meetings. So what are they going to see on a videotape when motions are not being read? They're going to hear the deputy warden going, okay, next item, the clerk will go moved by, seconded by, all in favor, carried. What does that look like on a video stream?
Members do have the opportunity, or public do have the opportunity to access the agenda as well, though.
Yep.
I think it's more relevant for those members of the public who may have a visual impairment and or for some other reason can't access the agenda. But for the moment at least, I'm comfortable accepting it. But you may hear concerns expressed by other members of the public, and if that's the case, then I think the matter needs to be revisited. But for the moment at least, I think there's reasonable accessibility for most people.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to raise it, no worries. And then the next one I had suggested was for 21.6, just existing, it says defer or postpone to a certain time. And I would like to remove the word defer and change it to postpone, simply because Robert's Rules of Order discourages the use of the word defer. It's not very clear. So the motion to postpone would be simply that you postpone it to a specific day, time, place, or wherever it's going. And I believe we had discussed this at an actual council meeting as well.
Agree with that.
And then the next one, 21.11, reconsideration of matters returned to the municipality by LPAT. That can be deleted. We no longer have LPAT. Back when LPAT came out, they had the discretionary option, if an appeal was made to them, that they could send something back to a municipal council to rethink their decision. So that's why that was in there, but that is no longer an option. So that can just be deleted.
Okay,
And then notices of motion. So I'm just suggesting that this be merged into the motion section and adding the following, that the clerk shall place notices of motion on the agenda in the order in which they are received. So currently it just states that the clerk puts them on the agenda. So I would like that additional wording that they do go order that they're received. So
Chronological order, you mean?
the order that they're received, yes. So if I receive one Monday, that's the first one on. Tuesday would go second. It just keeps the clerk neutral on how they are placed on the agenda. And then the next section was 23, and that's on voting. So number of votes. So just a suggestion here. So the subject to the section under 5.8 above, every member shall present at a meeting of council where a question is put shall have one vote, except for the mayor of said Frontenac, who shall have two votes. If the mayor of said Frontenac is absent at a meeting, the other councillor representing said Frontenac shall only have one vote. So I'm just, now that's what's there now. And I'm suggesting to add, if the mayor of South Frontenac is absent at the meeting and requests the alternate for South Frontenac to attend on his or her behalf, the alternate shall only have one vote. It just takes into, it didn't address the alternates prior to this simply because we didn't have them. But it's the mayor of said Frontenac that is given two votes. So when the alternate comes, he doesn't come as an alternate, or sorry, as the mayor. He just comes as the alternate member of council.
that's fair. Jeanette, I have a question. There seems to be a bit of a conflict or confusion between 23.2 and 23.9. 23.2 says every member of council shall vote. Section 23.9 says the warden may vote.
So we discussed this last time because it had it under the duties of the warden as well.
Yes.
And again, I searched the Municipal Act and I couldn't find anything in there that gives the head of council the option to vote or not vote.
Okay.
So which one was that under?
Well, 23.2 and 23.9. 23.9 says the warden may vote on any question and shall vote in case of recorded votes.
So interestingly enough, the proposed bylaw, and I am going to maybe send this out to my clerk's group friend, because the proposed bylaw that we did receive during that workshop actually had this provision in there that the warden may vote. I don't understand it. I'm going to say I don't understand it because I can't find anywhere in the municipal act that allows a member not to vote for the head.
But the reverse of that, Jeanette, is that if they don't vote, then it's considered a no vote. Am I correct?
That's correct.
But what if any sanction is there for that member who doesn't vote?
There is no sanction. If you choose not to vote, it's a no vote.
Okay,
And again, I mean, it's, and perhaps that's why they have it unless a recorded vote is asked for.
But in a recorded vote, Jeanette, if I remember correctly, is that in a recorded vote, you do not have to vote. But just because you don't vote, it will be counted as a no vote. Am I correct?
Well, that's correct. So
Yeah.
if I'm doing a recorded vote and I get around to Councillor Martin and he says, I don't want to vote,
Well-
I would say Councillor Martin abstention is a no vote.
Yeah. So if somebody says abstain, it means no.
That's correct. But I will follow up with the clerk's group on that one.
I mean, we rarely have 4 to 3 votes where the warden's vote could tie the vote and the motion would be lost. So I think in that case, the warden would have to vote or declare their position one way or the other.
So keep in mind that the majority of items that council votes on, it's done in committee of the whole, where the warden only has 1 vote. So if he were to vote in committee of the whole, that could create a tie vote, and that's a lost vote. So
Yes,
by
but-
asking the warden not to vote can skew the vote. If that makes sense.
You know, I guess my point was, and you're right, in committee of the whole, the warden isn't chairing the meeting. But in typical matter, if there's a 4 to 3 vote in council, and the warden has to either votes, the motion is lost because his vote ties the motion, which would be lost, or he carries the motion without declaring that the motion is carried, clearly how he's identified how he's voting, he or she.
So I can, again, I can check with, my clerk's group and even check with, we do have a legal contact that we can get some great advice from as well. But again, it's when you look at, if we leave this in here, because right now it's not talking about committee of the whole, it's talking about motions and voting. And it clearly states that the warden may vote on any question and shall vote in the case of a recorded vote. So if you're giving the warden discretion to vote or not to vote, and you're in committee of the whole, and you have all of a sudden 4 people in favor, if the warden sits there and calls the vote all in favor and 4 hands go up, all opposed and 3 hands go up, those in favor have won it, but those opposed can call a point of order and say, well, warden, how are you voting? Because if you vote on our side, that loses the vote. Like, it does have the ability to skew a vote in committee of the whole.
Yep.
So,
Well, I think it's, I mean, I haven't been here long enough to understand, but my impression would be the 23-9 talks to the warden as chair of the meeting and the neutrality of the chair. I don't think it's intended to apply for committee of the whole meetings, but that's my interpretation of it. It doesn't say that.
So again, that's something that really we haven't taken into consideration, considering that we move into committee of the whole.
Yep.
If you flip it, does the deputy warden, if they're in the chair, have the discretion to vote?
Same thing, yeah, you're right.
And it's going to skew the vote.
Well, I think that ultimately, if there's a 4-3 vote on the floor, the deputy warden's vote will he or she will be declaring the motion lost or approved. And that will essentially determine how the deputy warden voted. They may not put their hand up, but it would determine how the matter is carried or lost. If there's a 4-3 vote and the deputy warden declares the motion lost, the deputy warden has joined the 3 members to defeat the motion. If the deputy warden declares the motion carried, he is with the 4 members who voted in favor of it. Whether they've declared by a raised hand or otherwise.
If the committee's okay, perhaps we should revisit the ability for the warden or chair to opt to vote or not vote.
I think that would be a good thing, Jeanette.
I think when it comes to that, Mr. Chair, is that there has to be an understanding by members that by not voting, they are in actual fact voting against whatever's on the table. And I think that's where the understanding has to be made clear in either this procedural bylaw or any orientation that happens to people's positions, because very few people understand or know that that by abstaining or refusing to vote is an automatic no vote.
I believe we do have that earlier in the bylaw that a no vote, a refusal to vote is a no vote. It's this issue around whether or not the warden or the deputy warden may vote, or do they have to vote?
Comment. I'd like to go back to what the Councilor McDonald said about the orientation. I think it's quite true that the training needs to be there, and I don't think it has been in the past. Because I have seen councillors vote for political reasons, abstain from voting. I don't think they realized they're putting in a negative vote when they did that. And I think it goes back to what Councilor McDonald said with orientation. That should be highlighted to new councillors. But I don't think they realize what they're doing.
Something that I've observed is, do some councillors actually just abstain from voting, or they just don't? You know, I've seen a lot of times the council all in favor, and, you know, a couple just nod their heads and hands don't go up. Just, is it just?
I've seen people abstain from voting because, you know, political points. And I don't think they understood when they abstained from that vote that it's actually a negative vote. And I think it goes back to orientation.
Okay. What are the thoughts of a mock council meeting in orientation? That's a different subject. We have done that in the past. Okay, so the takeaway here is I am going to reach out to some of my colleagues regarding this issue around the warden or the chair may vote on any question, and find out why that is in these bylaws. Because as I said, it is also in the draft bylaw that we were given at that workshop, and I don't understand why, because I could find absolutely nothing in the municipal act that gives the warden or the head of council the option to not vote.
Thank you, Jen. I think that's appropriate.
Okay. So currently under 23.5, our voting method, it currently states a member shall vote by raising a hand or otherwise indicating the member's vote except where a recorded vote is requested. So we're suggesting to add an additional point that during virtual meetings, the warden may have the discretion to call a vote by asking all those opposed to the motion. And that's simply because, you know, a lot of times, you know, some come on without video because up north, you know, you don't have reliable internet, that sometimes you have to shut your video off. I've seen a lot of times where video is freezing, so somebody's not putting up their hand, and then the question's called, they put up their hand, but the video's frozen. So I think we found this in the last, that it's easier and more reliable to say all those who are not, who are opposed to the motion. And actually, I don't know if I have it worded correctly. Perhaps I should add at the end of that verbally, so that you don't need to raise the hand. So it would read, during virtual meetings, the warden may have the discretion to call a vote by asking those opposed to the motion verbally speak up or verbally speak.
Jeanette, through you, Mr. Chair, is it, should we be putting in here, this procedural bylaw is going to be around for a couple of years, I would think. And I'm just wondering if we're ever going to go to a place where we're going to have electronic voting.
So I believe I mentioned that at the last meeting. So the civic web portal, the iCompass meeting management software that we use for council meetings for agendas and such, does have that option that you can vote electronically. It is a larger question though, perhaps with council and my department head and Kelly as well, because there is a cost associated with it, because you would need to have laptops at the meeting in order to vote. So this could be something perhaps that we build into when the building is redeveloped and there's the redevelopment of a proper council chamber. Do we want to have laptops built in there, or even just like an iPad of some sort, so that when you arrive at council meetings, you're able to vote electronically? Because right now you would need your laptop to do that. So the capability is there for sure. And I would like to move forward with it. But at this point, it's a case of what do we do when you don't have your laptop with you or it's not working?
Okay, I can live with that if it's in the future.
Yeah, I think it's in the future, and I'm hoping that we can sort of build this into when we redevelop this building and we get a proper council chamber. But at this point in time, members would have to bring their laptops with them and they have to log in.
Okay. I'm
Jeanette,
happy with that, Mr. Chair.
Jeanette, how do you square that with transparency, though?
The vote will come up on the screen.
Yes, but not who voted, not how any member voted.
I believe it shows each member's vote. It shows exactly how you voted. So it would come up on the screen and then it would show a result and it would show who voted in favor, who voted opposed.
So every vote then becomes a
recorded vote.
Recorded vote. Okay.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So in terms of recorded vote, so we're just suggesting to add a couple of additions here, and this came up at the last meeting, if the committee will recall, where you felt that during the recorded vote, it should start with the person who requested the recorded vote. The current states right now, voting shall begin with the member. So we're going to add, should a recorded vote be requested by a member, the clerk shall poll the members of council as follows. So number one, voting shall begin with the member who requested the recorded vote and shall continue alphabetically until the vote is completed. Each member present, except a member who is disqualified from voting in accordance with subsection 2, shall announce their vote, and that of course is if you've declared. And then the clerk shall announce the result of the recorded vote, and the names of those members who voted for and those who voted against the motion shall be entered into the minutes. So that's currently what we do right now. It just sort of lays out a little bit differently and it clarifies it. So as I've noted there in my comments, we've combined 23.14 and 23.13 as currently they have their own 2 separate sections. So this is all now going into one on how we record a recorded vote.
Right.
And again, there we've clarified that when we call the vote, it starts with the member who requested it.
Actually, I think that's a good idea, and it's something that Mr. Pender brought forth, because I have seen over the years where someone calls a recorded vote, but because their name starts with Z, they get to vote last, and it puts everybody else in a difficult position sometimes. Not that I have any problem defending any vote I've ever taken, but by doing this, it revolves around a little bit when the person who's introducing or requesting the vote or the recorded vote, let them set the speed of that vote as it goes around the table. I think it's a great idea.
And then the next section, 24, is public question period. So I'm just going to ask, and only because I've never seen this before in other places where I've been, is this still required? If members of the press have a question, they can ask outside. I've never, I mean, do we actually ever get questions from the public? I'm just not sure it's difficult to do on the Zoom world.
I don't think it's necessary, frankly, but your other comments?
What did you want to do with 26.6? Sorry.
No, we're on section 24,
24.
public question period.
Since we've gone to virtual meetings, we haven't done this on our local agendas. But before, when we're in person and we had people in attendance in the room, we always asked if the public had a question. We did that when it was in-person meetings, but since we started virtual meetings, we haven't done it locally. That's North Frontenac. So I'm not sure it's required.
And you could get hit with some pretty
Questions.
you can really get blindsided.
I'd eliminate that, Mr. Chair.
I'm happy with that as well.
And then other business, I really didn't have any thoughts on that. It's pretty self-explanatory. Under bylaws, the only proposal, and I mean, it's not necessarily necessary, but I'm just suggesting under 26.8. So 26.8 talks about how we number our bylaws. And it currently says every bylaw once passed shall be numbered with a progressive number in the following form: 4 digits for the year, -4 digits for the bylaw number. So that's example 2010-0001. And then dated, duly signed by the warden and clerk, and the seal shall be affixed. So we've never hit 1,000 bylaws. I'm just not sure where that 0004 digit number comes from. We've never had 1,000 bylaws in a year. So at the most, we do about 40 or 50 bylaws. So I'm just suggesting that we change it to every bylaw passed by the council shall be numbered and dated and shall be signed with the seal of the municipal corporation and signed by the warden and clerk. And I'm sorry, and kept in the clerk's office or any other place appointed for that purpose. So we do keep them actually in the records room.
Storage.
But it just allows me to start numbering bylaws 2023-1, 2023-2, 2000. And it's just, it's a take it or leave it. It just, I was just adding
I'm comfortable with that suggested change.
more opportunity for mistakes.
I'm comfortable with that suggested change.
I am too, because it's a housekeeping issue, in my opinion. If it makes it easier, go for it.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
So sorry, we've taken a little bit longer. So the last section here is on committees. And hopefully I can get through this in 10 minutes. So just a couple of suggestions that I have for under committees. So for term of appointment, this really is a housekeeping issue. We're going to amend that to November 14th, given that the elections have changed now and the new term of council starts November 15th as opposed to December 1.
Thank you.
Okay, Pat? And then the next one I'm suggesting is that we add a new section. So I'm suggesting that we add we add a new section for absenteeism. And it's going to state if a member of a committee is absent for 3 consecutive meetings without cause acceptable to the committee, the absence will be brought to the attention of the clerk. The clerk will contact the absent committee member to discuss the reasons for absenteeism and to determine whether the member wishes to provide a letter of resignation. And upon confirmation that the member will no longer be serving on the committee, the clerk will notify council of the vacancy and the need for a replacement. If a member indicates the desire to continue to serve on the committee, the member will be advised that attendance is required or the member will be removed from the committee. So currently right now under the municipal act, there is a provision for members of council that if you're absent for more than 3 consecutive months, I think it is, not meetings, I think it's 3 consecutive months, that your seat is vacant. We have nothing in there for committees, and we have 1 committee member right now who has not been in attendance for over 3 months. I have reached out to them. I have not heard back from them. But there's nothing for me or for council to say, what do we do now? So I really think that it should be added in there. I think it's important that members understand that they're expected to show up for meetings. This gives me a little bit of direction on what to do when a member misses that number of meetings.
I think it's required because it's not fair to the people they're representing if they don't show up.
No.
And I think it's required, like, if they can't come, we'll find someone else who can.
Yeah. I think when they don't show up, it affects quorum as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. Jenna, I had a question on 2717.
Oh, okay.
I believe it may be a typo. This the second sentence, second line, rules governing the procedure of the council and the members of council at council. I think it's at committee because we're in the committee section.
No, so basically what it's saying is what the intent of that is. So the rules governing the procedure of council and the conduct of members at council shall be observed as far as they are applicable and subject to the specific rules for committees set out in this section. So basically what that is saying is the procedural bylaw that governs council and the
Okay, all right, yes, okay.
conduct of council and the voting and all that covers committees as well. So that's what that was.
All right, thank you.
But just to back up, are we okay if we add that section on absenteeism?
Yes.
Yes.
I have no problem with the addition of that absenteeism comment.
And then the other addition that I wanted, sorry, that I thought of was under 27.9, warden's membership on committees. Currently, it states that the warden shall be an ex officio member of all committees and task force, but I just wanted to add, and shall be counted for quorum purposes and entitled to vote at such meetings. there may be times we have to call on the board because we know we're not going to have quorum. So it allows us to reach out to the board to say, are you able to attend?
No problem there, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, no
Sure,
problem.
thank you.
And then under 27.10, the clerk shall be secretary. So it just states that the clerk or designate shall be secretary of all committees of council and shall be present at all meetings. The clerk shall record the meetings of all committees of council in the form of minutes. So I just wanted to add, and I believe this is something that the committee brought up earlier in our meetings, was that minutes, we're going to note that minutes shall reflect that the minutes are not verbatim. I believe somebody had brought that up earlier. So, and then this next one is not reflected in the committee bylaw. It's not reflected in the procedural bylaw at all, but it really needs to be there because committees of council are advisory committees, but the ultimate decision lies with council. So I'm just looking to add a new section that deals with recommendations that are lost or deferred at a committee meeting. So we're just going to add that report recommendations rejected by any committee must be reported to council with a negative recommendation, allowing council the opportunity to discuss them. Because even though the committee, we bring a staff report to a committee, say for example, to have a vegetable garden, community garden in one of the, along the trail, and the committee says no, it's ultimately council's decision. So it still needs to be reported to council. And then again, under B, motions that result in a tied vote at a committee must be reported to council with no recommendation, again, to allow council the opportunity to discuss and make a decision. Because if you recall, a tied vote would be a lost vote. And then these item C there, report recommendations receiving no mover or no seconder by any committee must be reported to council with no recommendation to allow council the opportunity to discuss them. So this makes sure that all recommendations come to council because it's council's ultimate decision. We don't want council not to have that opportunity to make that decision simply because the committee at first says no, because they have no, they're only an advisory capacity. So it just shows different ways of how they're going to come to council. So if it's lost at committee, we're going to report it to council that it was lost, but it's up for your discussion and approval, or it's tied at committee, so it's up for your discussion or approval, or that this recommendation didn't receive a mover or a seconder, but council needs to be the one making the ultimate decision.
Any question here? Would that require the council or the council or whatever who was interested in that particular motion or item that was lost to put it on the next agenda of county council?
No, so when anything that comes out of committees, at the end of the council reports, there's a report from advisory committees.
Yeah.
So I would just change the way I do that report for advisory committees. So it would look like the following recommendations are that council approved the following recommendation. The report of the advisory committee as follows, and that would include all the ones that were passed. Sorry. And then the next one would be, and that the following motions were lost at committee and are up for council discussion, and you would vote on that separately. You would discuss it and either vote, yes, we agree with the committee, or no, we don't. And then we would have another one that for tie votes or ones that don't receive a mover or seconder. So it all comes as one committee report. I just report differently that this was lost, this was not lost.
Because I was thinking, the reason I brought that up, I was thinking about Councilor Revelle, who was quite interested in what was happening in Verona with the KMP Trail. And the recommendation of the committee and what the council brought forward and decided. I just wonder how the two covered, how you got the committee stage to be an actual discussion by council. That was my question.
Yeah, that was a little bit different because the committee staff just went to the committee asking for their thoughts because council had asked report back to council.
Right.
So
Okay.
council, so staff, before they reported back to council, they just went to the committee and said, what do you think? but it wasn't the committee's role to report to council on that one. So that one's a little bit different. But for example, there was, I can certainly give one example where it's happened. I think it was a few years ago, it must have been because we were meeting in person. And they had brought a recommendation to CDAC to expand the ambassador program to rural Kingston.
Yeah.
And somebody moved the motion, but nobody seconded it. So that went to council as, and I think I noted it on the agenda. This just makes it a little more formal so that committees understand that even though you look at a recommendation and you say no, your role is only an advisory committee. So you're going to recommend to council that you don't approve it. But it's not to say that council's not approving.
I have no problem with the addition to the bylaw.
Is everybody okay with that one? And then the next one, it's just a suggested adding, public participation at committee meetings. So at committee meetings that are open to the public following the introduction of an agenda item and once a motion has been introduced, members of the committee may speak to the motion. Following the members' discussion, the chair may invite members of the public to share their comments, views, suggestions, and opinions. Prior to calling the question, the chair has discretion to give the public another opportunity to speak. So the public doesn't have an opportunity to speak at council meetings. They are formal, but council really creates advisory committees to seek that public input. So it's just a thought to maybe, and I think it's already happening as well, when members of the public join a committee meeting, you know, the chair will say, do you want to ask a question? It's already happening, but it just puts it formally in the bylaw and recognizes that committee meetings are a little less formal than council. They're there to seek input from the public. So if the public comes to a committee meeting, they are able to speak, or at the discretion of the chair, of course.
Jeanette, I have some, while I don't necessarily disagree with the concept of public participation, I think there would need to be a whole lot more structure around that concept. And before I would be happy to say public are able to speak and be heard again, that a committee meeting could easily get hijacked in a particular issue. I just think there needs to be some guidance in how that might be structured without the possibility of the committee meeting getting hijacked.
So what I could add is change the wording a little bit. So we have at committee meetings that are open to the public, following the introduction of agenda item and once a motion has been introduced, members of the committee may speak to the motion. And I'm going to put the word first there because the committee always speaks first. Following members' discussion, the chair may, so it's up to the chair may invite members of the public to share their comments, views, etc. And then prior to the question, again, the chair has the discretion. So we're putting the discretion into the hands of the chair. And I believe under the other portions of the committee bylaws, the chair actually has the same sort of control mechanisms as the warden and deputy warden in terms of controlling the meeting.
I might be more inclined to invite members of the public to essentially be a 5-minute delegate or something of that nature, rather than once the question has been put to the floor or prior to the vote being, prior to the motion being read, that the members of the public could comment.
The only except, Mr. Chair, was that if you're at a committee meeting and there's someone who happens to be a specialist on the area that you're actually discussing that's in attendance, that's not a member of the committee, you in actual fact, with the authority of the majority of the county committee members, may actually gain a tremendous amount of insight of this guy as, or persons that are specialists in the field that you're discussing. So that would be the only time that I would agree that someone should speak to a motion after it's been put on the floor without public notice.
Yeah, I'm very happy in the instance you described, Councillor. But I'm concerned that this just opens the floor up to anybody who has a gripe or a grievance about a particular item or issue, attends the meeting and is given the opportunity to speak ad nauseum without some sort of structure associated with it.
So sorry.
I would say that the discretion of the chair would rule that.
There are lots of chairs who may not be able to handle that.
I don't disagree.
So do we need to add an additional paragraph? The chair has the discretion to a public member should the discussion become disruptive. The meeting? Is that what you're thinking along the?
I can't think of a particularly good example. I mean, I'm part of the CDAC group, and I can see that we could well have an issue come before the committee that will have interest from business community or that feel that the county in general and the CDAC committee is their voice to be heard, mobs the meeting, and everybody wants to speak and speak again. And I just think while it may be extremely rare, I just think there ought to be some structure associated with it. And I don't know what to do or to put in short notice like this to arrive at a conclusion, but the concept of having public participation to hear people's interests or specific knowledge on a matter, I think is highly relevant, but there needs to be some structure associated with it, I believe, rather than just leave it as open as it currently appears to be.
Mr. Chair, may I suggest that we add to it, suggest a limit of a maximum of 2 speakers on the issue to a time limit of 2 minutes or something to that effect, so that you're not going to have mob mentality taking over. You're allowing 1 or 2 speakers on the issue, and that's it. And then the chair calls it. Would that suffice to limit your concerns?
Something like that would be would certainly work for me.
So you're speaking now of delegations, and we still have an opportunity for people to register as delegations at committee meetings. I'm thinking this is more along the lines of, for example, not this CDAC committee, but the previous council one. Ella Vanderberg would come quite often, just because she was a member of the CFTC, is that what? And they had a lot of knowledge and interest and ability and to add to the discussion. So a lot of times she would sit at the table and they would ask her opinion, her thoughts, so to speak.
Then I would suggest, Mr. Chair, that we add the line at the discretion of the chair after a vote has been taken to allow a speaker, that the maximum number of speakers be 2 to a limit of 1 minute or 2 minutes to allow for public participation.
So nobody would speak after the vote's taken. We're
No,
talking about after it's been put on the floor.
That's-
And we can remove prior to calling the question. The chair has the discretion to give the public another opportunity to speak.
The reason the public are there, they're trying to influence the vote.
Sure.
I don't know if they're necessarily trying to influence the vote or if they have things that they can add. For example, we're talking about CDAC, and we're talking about how to get more businesses involved, and or how to promote more businesses in the county. Or we're talking about issues of trying to find employees to work in the county because everybody's having that issue. And you've got a couple of people at the meeting who are interested, they're sitting there listening, and they may have, an opportunity to say, yeah, well, we own such and such a business down in South Frontenac, and our issue is that we can't get employees. So it's not that they come to curtail or hijack the meeting. These are committee meetings.
I would suggest that what we're talking about here through you, Mr. Chair, is we're talking about committees. And if the issues that are coming before committee are that important, then I would suggest that the committees are simply going to make a report to county council for further discretion and further discussion, so that if somebody's trying to influence the outcome of some direction that a committee is recommending, they'd probably want to get on as a delegate at the county level before the final vote's taken. But for the most part, committee members, unless you're a member of the library board or conservation authority or something like that, most committee members are just going to offer a report to county for further action. So I don't know how important the discussion has to be there.
Well, another example might be that we've hired a consultant to do some work for us, and Richard brings a report to CDAC to talk about it, but really the person doing all the work, and a good example is the last CDAC meeting, where they were talking about the Charlotte Lake Downtown Revitalization Project. And Richard had brought an information report to the committee, but I think her name, is it Adriana or Andrea, or who's working on that project, came to the meeting and was talking about the downtown project. Technically, she's a member of the public. She was not registered as a deputation, so technically, if that had been council, she wouldn't have been speaking. But committees, it's a little less formal. So
Right.
Richard has said, so she came and she talked about all these things that she was doing. There's been another, that's the best example I can think of right now, but there's been other times as well where, people have just come to a meeting because they're interested in it and have been given an opportunity to speak. But so it's already sort of happening, I mean, the committee structures are very relaxed environments. So if anybody shows up at a committee meeting, typically now it's happening already, that the chair will say, do you have anything to add? But we don't need to put it in there.
Yeah.
Pull it out.
Yeah, I have no problem with the example that you provided, Jeanette. But I just think there are occasions that may arise where the meeting just gets hijacked by somebody or a group of people, and I just reluctant to see that happen if the chair is not able to control it.
So I'm wondering if we could following members' discussions, the chair may invite members of the public to share their comments, views, suggestions, and opinions. We could put an additional line, they are not able to participate in debate. So you can share your opinion, You know, if we asked you a question, well, my opinion is I'm having trouble finding employees or whatever, but you're not able to participate in debate. Does that work, or does that, because you don't want a debate starting back and forth between any member of the committee and a member of the public. Or we can, again, just leave it out.
Well, I think we've always had the opportunity. The chair has the ability, if somebody is there, clearly has an interest in the matter. I don't believe the chair would not allow the opportunity for that person to speak or comment typically. But I just believe there should be some structure associated with it, rather than leave it wide open. That's my only concern, but we can let it go for now, put it in, if that's the wish of members of the committee, but be available if we run into problems with it, that we can come back to deal with it.
I think that's the right road to take, Mr. Chair, because we're going in circles here now ourselves, so.
But so I would suggest that we do add, though, following members' discussion, the chair may invite members of the public to share their comments, views, suggestions, and opinions, but may not participate in debate.
Okay.
And that stops the back and forth. And I would probably eliminate that last sentence as well. Prior to calling the question, the chair has the discretion to give the public another opportunity to speak. I don't think that's necessary.
No,
I agree.
I do too.
Now, do you want me to as well add in there, the chair has the discretion to halt a public member from speaking should the discussion become disruptive to the meeting? I don't think it's really necessary because the chair has all the rules of conducting a council meeting the same way the warden or deputy warden does. And if somebody gets out of hand, the chair has that ability to go back to the procedural bylaw and say, expel the person if it becomes necessary.
Good.
Okay, let's move along.
And then additional agenda items. So we're suggesting to change from any matter which is within the committee's mandate and which is not on the committee agenda or does not relate to a matter on the agenda may be considered by the committee if it agrees to add the matter to the agenda through a majority vote. And I'm suggesting that we change that to in accordance with the requirements for public notice, transparency, and disclosure. New substantive items should not be introduced on an agenda under other business.
I agree with that. It does not give anybody an opportunity to do any research or just introduce at the last moment.
Yeah. And then the last one is 27.28. And again, it's the same one as discussed earlier. LPAT no longer exists. So that's really just a housekeeping thing to remove that provision. And that takes you to the end of the bylaw in terms of the actual rules of the bylaw itself. So at the next meeting, what I would like to bring forward to the committee at the next meeting is the discussion of our committees. So right now we have the committees are contained in our bylaw under Schedule B. There's quite a number of them under there. So some of them may not be necessary. Some of them staff may want to tweak a little bit, whether or not they're working or not. So at the next meeting, I am going to reach out to staff to come to the meeting with me and talk about the committee structure itself, what committees we have in place. Do we need different committees or the ones that we have right now? Is that what we want to continue on with? So the next meeting, I'm guessing, will be focused mainly on Schedule B, which is the advisory committees. And then after that, there isn't much we can do with Schedule C, which is the external boards. Those are ones where we're invited to participate on. There's the library board, the health unit. I believe there's also the food council that Councillor Higgins or Councillor Higgs sits on. And I believe,
Housing and,
yes, housing and homelessness is there as well. And then the last piece would be Schedule D, which is the council liaisons. So this is great because you all are the council liaisons. So maybe look at the council liaison, and that's actually nice that you're all in this committee, because that Schedule D council liaison sets out what your role is as the liaison. So is that working? Is it not working? Does it need some changes? What your thoughts are on Schedule D?
yeah,
So that would be for our next meeting. And then that would take us to, so that would be March 16th, I believe, is our next meeting. And then April hopefully will be just a wrap up with some odds and ends. So the April meeting, for example, I'm going to maybe perhaps bring to the committee some of the things that other municipalities are doing in their procedural bylaw that the committee may say, hey, I kind of like that in our bylaw. Some of the other things that we may have missed. And you're welcome to look at your township bylaws as well, or if you're doing something different at the townships that you think might work here at the county. And that would wrap it up so that hopefully by May you have a final bylaw in front of you that can go to council.
okay, Mr. Chair,
Yes,
I have a couple of questions and I'd like to answer for the next meeting, not now. If a council loses connectivity at a meeting through no fault of their own, should they be shown as in the minutes as having regrets or having lost contact? Because people looking at the minutes, it just says Bill McDonald regrets. It indicates I didn't attend any of the meeting, but in actual fact, I was there for over half of it. I'd like some thoughts on that. And I'd like to know how many people are actually viewing this committee meeting, if we can get that for the next meeting.
I can certainly get that for the next meeting on who's viewing the committee. In terms of your first question, I do mark it in the bylaw, not that you've regretted. So we had that happen a couple of times. So if you're not able to connect at all, under the very top, I would put Councillor McDonald was unable to connect. If you lose connectivity during the meeting, and I put right in the minutes where you lost connectivity, and I said, and it states in the minutes, Councillor McDonald lost connectivity, and then it also states back in the minutes when you reconnect as well.
Okay, I'm happy with that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Can I have that March date again for the next meeting?
Third Wednesday of the month, that's March 16th, I believe.
In the afternoon.
March
March
16th?
16th, that's County Council Day also. Jeanette, you're a specialist here also through you, Mr. Chair, is that if the agenda on is completed on at a meeting, do you need an adjournment motion?
That's that. I think, I don't know. I really don't know. I'd have to really clearly look at Rob's rule of order in terms of where it says where you actually need a motion to adjourn.
Well, I thought we could just sit around and look at each other.
is there any other business for the committee? Call for a motion to adjourn then.
I'll so move.
Go for the- Anyone opposed? It's carried.
All right, so we'll see everybody next month.
Thank you all for joining us virtually this time, and thank you, Jeanette, and for